Have you ever noticed how some people hold power over others without ever saying a word? They don't chase, they don't explain, they just disappear, and suddenly everyone scrambles to get close again. It's not magic, it's the power of pulling back, and most people never learn how to use it to their advantage. This isn't about playing games, it's about understanding a fundamental truth about human psychology. We value what becomes less available to us. When you're constantly there, always responding, always helping, always giving your energy away, people start taking your presence for granted. It becomes expected rather than appreciated. But something powerful happens when you stop being so available. The dynamics shift. People who barely noticed you suddenly feel your absence. Those who took advantage start questioning if they pushed too far. The energy you were freely giving becomes something they now have to earn. And this is where real change begins. It's like the moment just before you hit send, or just before you speak, that holds more power than you think. It's the moment you don't react, the breath you take instead of the reply you fire off. And in that silence, something starts to shift. So what if silence was your strategy? See, you've been taught that strength is powerful. But the truth? Silence rearranges the room. It unsettles the dynamic. When you stop feeding the cycle with your energy, the cycle starts to starve. Take something as small as a group chat. You usually reply right away, always available, always explaining. But then one day, you don't. You leave a message unread. You don't justify, you don't explain. Suddenly people notice. Everything okay? They ask. The silence becomes a signal. They feel it. Your energy pulled back, your presence gone. And just like that, the power rebalances without a single word. You don't need to argue to prove your point. You don't need to justify your feelings to validate them. Sometimes the most commanding thing you can do is nothing at all. There's a quiet transaction happening in every relationship you've ever had. And chances are you didn't even know you were in it. It's not just about connection, it's about access, emotional access. The version of you that people rely on, to comfort, to react, to absorb. The fixer, the soother, the one who explodes on cue, then apologizes just to keep the peace. You think you're just being yourself, but are you? Or are you performing the version of you that keeps everything stable? The truth is, they're not connecting with you. They're connecting with your patterns, with the emotional predictability you've trained into the relationship. They know when you'll flinch, when you'll cave, when you'll crack a joke to avoid the edge of truth. That's not intimacy, that's programming. And the more reliable your reactions, the more control you give away. Because emotional availability, when unchecked, becomes leverage. Not always on purpose, but always in effect. The moment someone knows exactly what button to press to get a response, that's not connection, that's control. Now imagine this. They bait you like they always do. But this time you don't respond. No defense, no frustration, just silence. Watch what happens. They stumble, the script falls apart. Because you've broken the loop. And in that pause, you've reclaimed your power. See, the part they really relied on wasn't your love. It was your reaction. That was the emotional currency they learned to spend. And the second you stop reacting, your identity, your value, starts to shift. Not in their eyes, in yours. Because they don't fear your anger. They fear your neutrality. They don't fear your voice. They fear the silence where their power used to live. And once you stop playing the part they cast you in, they don't know who they're dealing with anymore. Good. That means you're finally meeting the real you. Let's get honest. Most people don't respect your time. Not really. They respect your availability, your access, your usefulness. But your time, your sacred, limited, never get it back again time, that's rarely considered. Because society taught people to expect your energy like a subscription service. And you've been trained to auto-renew. Every day, every hour, every yes, without ever checking if you had anything left to give. But here's the deeper truth. Your time is your soul's currency. And every time you spend it on someone else's chaos instead of your own alignment, You're going broke in ways no one can see. You cancel your evening, the one night your nervous system was begging for rest, the bath, the book, the nothingness. And instead, you pick up the phone. Drama again. You nod. You hold space. You shrink. And when it's over, they feel better. But you're vibrating on a lower frequency. You've traded your peace for proximity. Again. See, your body is energy. Every thought, every emotion, every boundary you set or don't set emits a vibrational signature. High frequencies like joy, clarity, self-respect, and low frequencies like guilt, resentment, depletion. Every forced yes lowers your vibration. Not metaphorically, but energetically. You're literally tuning yourself to someone else's chaos pattern. And the more you do it, the more your field adapts. You start attracting people who expect that version of you, the overly available, boundaryless version, and they don't even realize they're doing it. They're just syncing to the frequency you've broadcasted. But here's the spiritual trap. You start thinking being drained is being loving, that abandoning yourself is being kind, that martyrdom is some sort of moral high ground. It's not. Every time you say yes to what your soul didn't consent to, you fracture your alignment. And fractured alignment becomes chronic imbalance, emotionally, mentally, even physically. That's when burnout shows up. That hollow, numb feeling of living out a life that doesn't even feel like yours. And still, most people won't ask what it cost you to be there for them. They'll just assume you had it to give. Why? Because we live in a culture where people feel entitled to your time, but rarely honor it. So here's a reminder. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your energy. Your peace doesn't need a permission slip. Your frequency doesn't need to be lowered just to make someone else comfortable in their dysfunction. You weren't born to be emotionally on call. You were born to tune in to the resonance of your soul. And here's the heaviest truth of all. Your time here is limited. You don't get to extend it by pleasing people. Every hour you spend in resentment is an hour you never get back. Your life isn't some infinite reservoir of maybe next time. It's happening right now, this minute. So the question isn't just, who are you trying to keep? It's also, what part of yourself are you losing in the process? What if you stopped asking, will they still love me if I say no? And started asking, will I still love me if I keep saying yes? Because your soul is not here to be exhausted. It's here to expand. And you don't expand by shrinking. You expand by honoring the frequency of your truth, no matter how inconvenient that is for others. So let them adjust, or let them go. You have a life to live, one that actually feels like yours. Being too available is one of the most subtle forms of self-erasure. Because when people love what you offer more than who you are, it creates an illusion of closeness. One that feels warm on the surface, but hollow at the core. You show up, you support, you soften the chaos, and for a moment, it feels like a connection. But beneath that transaction is something quieter, something more disturbing. They're not holding you, they're holding your function. And maybe you've gotten so good at being helpful that no one's ever had to ask who you are beneath all that help. Maybe they never noticed. Maybe you didn't either. This is how it begins. At first, it looks like love. It sounds like gratitude. It moves like trust. But it's not love, it's utility. And the longer you play the role of the rescuer, the more people forget that you have wounds of your own. Wounds you never voiced because your value, subtly, quietly, got entangled with your silence. Let's be honest. You became indispensable because you didn't believe you were lovable without being needed. And that's the deeper truth most people avoid. Not because they don't feel it, but because once you name it, you have to confront how long you've lived in the performance. Jung would call this a confusion of identity, a collapse of self into the persona, the mask you crafted to navigate social expectation. It wasn't created out of manipulation. It was born from protection. When authenticity felt unsafe, when softness was dismissed, when your real voice was too disruptive to be welcome, you adapted. You gave the world what it rewarded: your competence, your loyalty, your availability. And so the mask stayed. But over time, that mask stopped being an accessory. It became a prison. You weren't responding anymore. You were rehearsing. You weren't connecting. You were maintaining your relevance, maintaining your role, maintaining your place in the lives of people who only saw you clearly when you were filling a need. And now you don't know where your usefulness ends and your identity begins. But here's the part no one talks about. When love is entangled with utility, silence becomes a threat. Stillness becomes suspicious. Rest feels like rebellion. Because if you're not actively proving your worth through output, presence, and service, what are you? And that's the terrifying question you've been running from. Because underneath all that doing is a soul that's afraid of what happens when you finally stop. What if the calls stop too? What if they drift? But here's the paradox. You keep giving to avoid that possibility, and in doing so, you guarantee it. Because the more you train people to value your service over your substance, the more invisible your essence becomes. And that's where the soul starts to fracture. Let's bring this into the realm of energy. When you offer your emotional labor as a form of identity, your energetic field begins to thin. You become more accessible to others, but less accessible to yourself. You give away your bandwidth in fragments. A reply here, a fix there, a shoulder, a call, a rescue, until the signal of your own frequency becomes faint and unstable. It's not that you don't exist. It's that you've become difficult to locate inside your own life. That's what happens when usefulness becomes your currency. You keep handing it out until there's nothing left to spend on your own needs. And when you finally look up, you're surrounded by people, but profoundly alone. Not because they failed you, but because you taught them to love the mask. You were generous, but you were also afraid. Afraid to be disappointing. Afraid to be ordinary. Afraid that if you stopped being extraordinary in what you gave, you'd become forgettable in who you are. But usefulness isn't love. It's just the most socially acceptable version of self-abandonment. And here's what Jung would add. The longer you over-identify with your persona, the louder your shadow becomes. The parts of you that are tired, angry, bitter, depleted. They don't disappear. They accumulate. They wait. And eventually they surface, not to destroy you, but to ask you gently, what would remain if you stopped performing? You are not inexhaustible, and pretending you are is a slow form of soul death. You deserve to be loved in your stillness, in your no, in your silence, in your absence. The people who only show up for the version of you that solves things are not your people. The ones who stay when you rest, those are the ones who see you. Those are the ones who make love safe again. So here's the invitation. Take off the mask, withdraw the performance, and see who stays and really cares for you, not to punish, but to protect what's left, to recover the parts of you that never needed to be earned in the first place. You are not here to be a utility. You are not here to be accessed on demand. You are not here to keep proving that you matter. You are here to exist fully, imperfectly, and unapologetically. And the ones who can hold that, they're not threatened when you stop giving. They're grateful when you start being, because that's where the real connection begins. Not in what you do, but in who you are, when the performance finally ends. Your power doesn't always leave you in loud, dramatic exits. Most of the time, it seeps out quietly, through unchecked reactions, petty arguments, unworthy triggers, and the slow drip bleed of emotional overstimulation. You don't notice it at first, because it feels righteous, justified, immediate. You argue for hours online, defending a point you forgot you even cared about. You send 5 paragraphs to someone who was never listening. You wake up rehearsing a confrontation that hasn't happened, and by noon your chest is tight, and your brain feels like static. Then you wonder, why do I feel so heavy? Why am I so drained? The answer is simple. Every overreaction is a power outage in your internal system. Jung understood this long before social media turned every thought into a performance. He saw the psyche not as a filing cabinet of thoughts, but as a living current, an energetic system constantly managing where attention flows, where emotion is focused, where power is leaked or retained. And when you react from impulse, without pause, without reflection, you divert that energy away from your higher function. You feed the noise instead of the signal. You empower your shadow instead of your center. Reactivity feels like motion, but it's often just motion sickness. And the truth most people don't want to face is this. You can be right and still lose. You can win the argument, get the last word, destroy someone's logic, and still feel depleted, confused, and disconnected afterward. Why? Because the energy you gave wasn't an investment. It was an emotional expense with zero return. You don't gain power by reacting. You gain power by choosing what's worth responding to. And that's where the discipline comes in. Your emotions are currency. The word emotions says it all. Emotion stands for energy in motion. And every reaction is a purchase. You're either buying deeper self-alignment, or you're paying for temporary validation with long-term fatigue. Emotional discipline isn't coldness, it's conservation. It's the refusal to let your nervous system be hijacked by people who haven't earned your intimacy or your effort. It's walking away from conversations that only exist to feed someone's need for conflict. It's staying silent in the face of provocation, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know they won't hear it anyway. It's recognizing that not every invitation to battle is worth attending. Some are traps disguised as dialogue. Some are voids that consume whatever light you throw into them. And here's where it gets clear. Avoiding reaction doesn't mean suppressing truth. It means refining your expression. It means learning to feel everything, but transmit selectively. It means honoring your emotional world without turning it into public currency, because not every part of you is meant to be shared. Not every feeling is meant to be externalized. Some things are meant to be witnessed by you in stillness, without applause or opposition. That is the essence of psychic sovereignty. To no longer need the external world to validate what your inner world already knows. But this is not how the world is set up. We live in an attention economy, and attention is addicted to reaction. The more you react, the more you engage. The more you engage, the more your energy gets harvested by algorithms, by ideologies, by unhealed people looking for emotional targets. So you have to interrupt the cycle. You have to become selective, strategic, still. So reclaim your focus. Audit your reactivity, withhold your fire from the places that only want to burn it. And remember, you are not here to be perpetually triggered. You are here to transform, to transmute, to guard your energy as if your evolution depends on it, because it does. And there are few moments more defining than the split second after you've been triggered, when the words hit, the tone sharpens, a look, a gesture, a silence, and suddenly your entire body is bracing for impact. And you can feel it. The blood rush, the tightening in your throat, the surge of heat behind your face. Your jaw clenches before you can stop it. And then comes the story. They don't respect me. They're trying to humiliate me. I have to say something. I need to defend myself. That internal rush isn't weakness. It's history. It's memory stored in the body. It's a younger version of you surfacing in milliseconds, believing deeply that if you don't act right now, you'll be diminished, erased, made small. And so we react. Quickly, loudly, sharply, emotionally. But if you're willing to pause, to resist the gravity of the reflex, you begin to realize something far more important. The trigger is not the threat. The trigger is the teacher. It's not evidence of your instability. It's a flare, pointing to what still holds power over you. Not the person in front of you, not the situation at hand, but the unprocessed wound they just grazed. That's the discomfort most people run from. The unbearable recognition that the enemy is not out there. It's the unexamined vulnerability within. Carl Jung spoke often of this inner fragmentation. He believed the path to the full realization of the self required radical confrontation with the shadow. Your shadow is the hidden part of the psyche, buried beneath the persona. Triggers are the shadow's voice, not to shame you, but to signal, there's something here you've abandoned, and it's time to bring it home. But that can only happen if you stay. Not stay in the argument. Stay in yourself. That's the discipline. To remain conscious while your nervous system screams to shut down, lash out, or escape. To feel everything without becoming the feeling. To notice the rise without mistaking it for truth. To recognize that you are in the presence of your own edge, and choose not to collapse over it. Because mastery is not the absence of reaction. It's the ability to meet your reaction with enough awareness to decide how much of it is yours and how much is ancestral, conditioned, inherited, automated. When someone insults you and you feel your body preparing for war, but instead of fighting, you breathe, you observe, you hold the charge without spilling it everywhere, you have stepped out of the spell. You're no longer being moved by the moment. You're moving with it, from a place of centeredness, not compulsion. This is the difference between reactivity and sovereignty. Reactivity is reflex. Sovereignty is response. One is survival-based. The other is self-possessed. And yes, it's hard. It requires you to feel the very thing you've spent your entire life avoiding. Helplessness, abandonment, invalidation, betrayal. Whatever the root wound is, the trigger will find it. And if you let it, the trigger will rule you. But if you learn to sit with it, to sit with the shame, the anger, the rejection, long enough to see it, you take its power away. You're no longer a servant to the pattern, you're the witness, the container, the presence that holds the charge without becoming the explosion. And in that moment, you reclaim something no external validation could ever give you: choice. The choice to speak with intention or say nothing at all. The choice to hold your center or let it be hijacked. The choice to act in alignment rather than reaction. Because let's be clear, feeling triggered is inevitable. But letting that trigger define your reality is optional. It's not about never being affected. It's about being aware enough to know when your old wounds are steering the ship, and conscious enough to take the wheel back. This is the real work. Not avoiding conflict, not pretending you're healed, but practicing presence in the exact moments when it's hardest to hold. You don't need to fight every battle that reminds you of your past. You don't need to explain your worth to people committed to misunderstanding it. You don't need to match the energy of the provocation. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is nothing. No defense, no performance, just stillness. Stillness that says, I know who I am. And this doesn't get to decide that. Because true power is not loud. True power is steady, measured, unbothered by noise that used to destabilize you. And this is the moment you realize the trigger is no longer in control. You are. That is not avoidance. That is evolution. And if you want to measure how free you really are, don't look at how you feel when life is smooth. Look at who you become when you're provoked. Because the path to sovereignty is not paved with perfection. It's built in the fire, with the breath you take when you'd rather yell, the silence you choose when you could dominate, and the inner stillness you build when everything in you wants to break. This is how you meet yourself. This is how you take your power back. And you probably notice sometimes when people look at you, they are not seeing you at all. They are seeing a version of you shaped not by presence or curiosity, but by projection. Their unresolved stories, unmet needs, and hidden fears disguised as expectations. And if you've spent your life being agreeable, adaptable, or emotionally fluent, You probably became the perfect screen. Not because you asked to be one, but because survival taught you to bend toward what people wanted, before you even knew what you needed. You learned early how to sense the room, how to anticipate, absorb, and adjust, how to read between words to stay ahead of disappointment, to earn closeness by being whatever they needed you to be. And it's not love, it's a performance of worth. Because when people are interacting with their projection of you, they're not connecting to your being, they're relating to your utility, to the image of you that confirms their worldview, to the version of you that doesn't disrupt their fantasy, to the archetype they've cast you in to soothe something in them. You become the helper, the strong one, the calm one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't need much. And as long as you play the part, the relationship appears to work. But the moment you shift, when you get quiet instead of comforting, when you say no instead of accommodating, suddenly the energy changes. You're no longer easy. You're no longer convenient. You've broken the projection. And in systems where your compliance has been mistaken for character, your truth will be perceived as betrayal. Not because it's wrong, but because it threatens the balance of control, because it exposes the fact that the relationship wasn't truly mutual. It was conditional, contingent on your ability to stay inside the frame. Jung taught us that projection is an unconscious process. People cast parts of themselves they can't hold, their wounds, their idealizations, their shame, onto others. They do it automatically. And if you're not aware of it, you will mistake being idealized for being loved. But it's not the same, because love is based in knowing. Projection is based in need. One liberates, the other demands your obedience. The danger of projection is not just misrecognition. It's the psychic erosion that occurs when your identity is reduced to a single dimension. You become a symbol, a role, a function in someone else's emotional economy. And here's where it becomes manipulation. You are praised when you stay in the role, validated when you self-sacrifice, rewarded for silence, admired for compliance. But the second you reclaim your time, energy, or agency, the same people who once adored you become cold, passive-aggressive, critical, or even hostile. They withdraw affection to steer you back into place. They label you selfish, changed, or ungrateful. Not because you've done something wrong, but because they've lost control of the character you were cast to play. And many people, sensing that shift, fold. They shrink back into the script, because the loss of belonging, even false belonging, can feel more terrifying than the loss of self. But there comes a point, often after repeated emotional exhaustion, when you realize that maintaining the performance is far more costly than walking away from the stage. And that's the moment the mask slips. The moment you step out of the projection and allow yourself to become unrecognizable to those who only loved the idea of you. And yes, they may leave, but something else happens too. The projection collapses, and with it, the manipulative dynamic dies, because manipulation requires predictability. It needs your consent, whether silent or conditioned. It depends on your willingness to perform your part, even when it costs you your peace. But the moment you stop performing, you become unpredictable, not in a volatile way, in a sovereign one. You are no longer readable through the lens of their past, no longer shapeable through guilt, no longer pliable under pressure. And this new version of you, the one who doesn't automatically say yes, the one who doesn't trade boundaries for belonging, this version disorients people who were never seeing you clearly in the first place. But that disorientation is sacred. It means you're no longer playing a part. You're becoming a person, a full, multi-dimensional, emotionally honest being who no longer contorts to remain digestible. This is not rebellion. This is reclamation. You are not here to be interpreted. You are here to be witnessed. And those who can't, who refuse to, were never connecting to you, only to their projection. So let the roles fall. Let the applause fade. Let the version of you that only existed for other people's comfort dissolve. And in its place, let something quieter, truer, and far more powerful emerge. The you who no longer participates in your own erasure. The you who no longer fears being misunderstood. The you who would rather be real than revered. The you who is free. Silence, when chosen with awareness, is not retreat. It is a reclamation. Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But he also knew that not every conflict is worth entering, especially when the conflict is designed to provoke your reactivity, not your growth. When someone attempts to bait you through criticism, distortion, or performance, they're often not speaking to you at all. They're speaking to the image they've projected onto you. And if you react without awareness, you confirm the very role they've unconsciously cast you in. That's the trap. Silence breaks that spell. It collapses the loop. It confronts the manipulative dynamic, not with retaliation, but with absence. An energetic void where reaction used to live. And that absence forces the projection to fall apart under its own weight. This is why silence is so threatening to those who seek to control. Without your participation, their narrative has no co-author. Their strategy has no target. Their projection has no anchor. To stand in silence while your buttons are pushed is not spiritual bypassing. It is psychological mastery, and it is individuation in motion. Jung's term for the process of becoming whole. It requires that you step out of roles imposed by others and resist the urge to collapse into reaction simply because the story demands it. And yes, the silence may be misunderstood. You may be called cold, aloof, avoidant. Let them mislabel your clarity. That, too, is part of their pattern. You are not here to be reshaped by their discomfort. There is a particular strength that comes not from speaking, but from staying still long enough to see clearly. Lucid silence is not the silence of withdrawal or defeat. It is the silence of the awake, the silence of a mind that no longer races to defend, correct, or perform. The silence of someone who understands that not every moment calls for articulation. Some call for observation. In the space between trigger and response, there is a rare clarity, but only if you're willing to pause long enough to claim it. Because when you speak too quickly, you miss the subtle architecture of the moment. You miss the flicker in their eyes, the word they almost said, but didn't. The contradiction between what they say and what they do. And more importantly, you miss what you tend to overlook, your own habitual reactions. When you stay quiet, you begin to see the full picture. The game behind the gesture, the pattern beneath the apology, and the echo of manipulation disguised as concern. This is what Jung would call the beginning of individuation, the capacity to separate your awareness from the projections of others, to begin differentiating your essence from your conditioning, to stop being the persona others constructed for you, and start becoming the self you were born to uncover. Because when you're constantly speaking, especially in moments of emotional charge, you are often not speaking from presence. You are speaking from programming, from childhood reflex, from trauma logic, from the archetype someone else trained you to perform. But silence interrupts that loop. It turns you from participant into witness, and witnessing, in its purest form, is the beginning of liberation. To observe is to reclaim the energy you've spent trying to control narratives that were never yours to manage. It is to step outside the emotional transaction and begin decoding it, to ask, with clarity and calm, not how do I respond, but what is actually happening here? Because there is always a deeper dynamic, a deeper truth, and most of it is hidden in plain sight if you're quiet enough to see it. The moment you stop reacting, you start noticing how often someone's story shifts to place blame on you. How a casual comment is really an emotional test. How an innocent question masks a pattern of control. Silence becomes your vantage point, a raised platform above the fog of performance and pain. This isn't about superiority, it's about sovereignty. You no longer need to interrupt falsehood. You let it reveal itself. Because in your stillness, people expose their strategies. They tell on themselves. They stretch their sentences too far. They reach for justification too quickly. And you, no longer entangled in the exchange, are finally able to see. And that sight is not just external, it turns inward too. In silence, you notice your own nervous tics, your urge to be liked, your fear of being misunderstood, your tendency to over-explain. You notice how often your voice has been used to defend boundaries you could simply enforce with presence. Because here's the paradox of lucid silence. The less you say, the more clearly you're seen. First by yourself and then by others. To choose observation over reaction is to reclaim your tempo. To take yourself out of emotional captivity and return to the seat of your own center. And from that center you realize something rare. You don't have to win the conversation. You just have to stop performing in it. You don't have to correct the narrative. You only have to withdraw the energy that was holding it in place. Lucid silence is the act of no longer feeding the lie, of saying more with stillness than 1,000 rebuttals ever could. Because when you speak from reflex, your truth gets diluted by urgency. But when you see before you speak, your words, or your choice to withhold them, carry precision, weight, and direction. And that is the beginning of psychic economy, of emotional discipline, of subtle but irreversible power. Not the power to control someone else, but the power to never again be pulled out of yourself by someone who doesn't deserve to hold your attention in the first place. Clarity is what silence gives you, and clarity, when fully embodied, is indistinguishable from strength. But speaking your truth isn't always empowering. Sometimes it's draining, especially when your words fall on ears that aren't really listening. We often think sharing is always the right thing to do, that if we explain ourselves clearly enough, we'll be understood, that if we speak from the heart, others will respond with care. But the truth is, not everyone is ready or willing to receive what you reveal. And giving away your truth to the wrong people can leave you feeling more misunderstood, more frustrated, and more alone than before. Every time you speak about your needs, your boundaries, your journey, you're offering more than information. You're offering a piece of yourself. And that comes with a cost: emotional energy, mental clarity, vulnerability. So the question is, are you investing your voice where it matters, or are you spending it where it's being wasted? Carl Jung talked about the danger of sharing parts of yourself with people who only see you through their own projections, meaning they aren't really listening to you. They're listening through the filter of their own stories, assumptions, and expectations. And when someone's mind is already made up about who you are, even your clearest words can't reach them. That's why explaining yourself to people who constantly twist your meaning isn't communication, it's damage control. You don't owe anyone a step-by-step breakdown of your decisions. You don't have to justify your boundaries. You don't have to defend your peace to someone who benefits from your confusion. You get to be selective with your truth. It's about protecting your energy. It's about knowing when to speak and when to simply hold your clarity in silence. Not every conversation is safe. Not every listener is capable. And not every moment is meant for disclosure. This is emotional maturity, knowing when your truth is being asked for out of love and when it's being extracted out of control. You start to notice how often you over-explain to keep the peace, how quickly you soften your boundaries just to be heard, how drained you feel after sharing with people who never really see you. So here's the shift. Speak less where you're not respected. Speak deeply where you are. Let your silence become a filter. Let your presence carry what doesn't need to be said. And trust that those who can truly receive you won't need a performance to understand your truth. Because when you stop giving away your voice to those who never earned it, you don't become harder, you become wiser. And you begin to speak like someone who knows their words matter, Knowing your boundaries isn't the same as holding them. Understanding your patterns isn't the same as changing them. Awareness is essential, but without action, it becomes another way to delay growth. You can study yourself endlessly and still avoid making different choices. It's easy to stay in your head, to analyze instead of act. You tell yourself you're working on it, but deep down you know nothing changes until your behavior does. Carl Jung wrote that true transformation only begins when awareness meets responsibility, when insight stops being theoretical and starts shaping how you live. It's not enough to know that people-pleasing is rooted in fear. You have to feel the fear and still say no. It's not enough to say your peace matters. You have to let the phone ring. You have to stop explaining your decisions to people who never listen. Discipline is the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. And at first it will feel uncomfortable, maybe even wrong, because your nervous system is still wired for the old pattern. But every time you pause, choose presence over performance, silence over apology. You're rewiring more than your behavior. You're reclaiming your self-respect. This isn't about perfection, it's about practice. Your truth doesn't need more discussion, it needs more embodiment. So ask yourself honestly, are you performing what's safe or living what's real? Because reflection without action is avoidance, and clarity without change is just another cage. Start small, hold the boundary, let the silence speak, let the phone ring. That's when healing stops being a concept and becomes a choice. Being alone can feel scary, especially if you've always tied your worth to your relationships, your roles, or how much space you take up in other people's lives. We're taught that solitude means something's wrong. That if we're not surrounded, included, or constantly connected, we've failed somehow. But what if that's not true? What if solitude isn't a punishment at all, but the beginning of something important? There comes a point in life when you start to feel worn out by your own performance. You catch yourself saying yes when you want to say no. You show up to things that don't feed you. You smile, nod, and go along, even when it costs you peace. And maybe you've done that for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be you when no one's watching. That's where sacred isolation comes in. Not isolation as in cutting people off or building walls, but a kind of intentional space where you pull back from all the noise so you can hear yourself again. At first, the quiet can feel heavy, unfamiliar, even lonely. But stay with it. Because underneath the discomfort is something rare, your real self. Carl Jung, the psychologist, talked about how we all wear masks, what he called the persona. It's how we get through life, fit in, function. But over time, if you wear the mask too long, you forget what's underneath. To find yourself again, you have to step away from the crowd. Not forever, but long enough to notice which parts of you were shaped by approval, fear, or habit. Sacred isolation is that pause. It's when you stop performing, when you stop being who everyone else needs you to be, and you start remembering who you are when no one needs anything from you at all. You begin to enjoy your own company. You choose rest over obligation. You say no without guilt. You sit in silence and realize you're not lonely, you're peaceful. And from that space, something powerful happens. You begin rebuilding your life around your truth, not other people's expectations. You stop needing constant validation. You stop chasing closeness that leaves you feeling empty. You start choosing what feels honest, even if it's quiet, even if it's small. Because sacred isolation doesn't make you disconnected, it makes you whole. Sometimes pulling away isn't rejection, it's remembering, it's reclaiming, it's coming home to yourself. And once you do, you no longer seek yourself in others. You carry yourself with you, everywhere. Letting go can feel like grief, but sometimes it's not loss, it's release. Not a goodbye to something beautiful, but a quiet escape from something that was breaking you in slow, subtle ways. When we distance ourselves from someone, our first instinct is often guilt. We question whether we're being unfair, too sensitive, too cold. But take a closer look. Ask yourself honestly, Are you grieving the person? Or are you finally detoxing from the chaos they brought into your life? Not every connection is nourishing. Some are draining, disorienting, even addictive. You feel responsible for their emotions. You manage their moods like walking a tightrope. You leave conversations more confused than clear. It's easy to mistake that intensity for depth. But emotional chaos isn't closeness. It's instability masked as intimacy. And walking away from it doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. You may not notice the weight until it's gone. But one day, after you put some distance between you and the person who always pulled you into their storm, you'll feel it. Peace. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. You stop overthinking. You stop rehearsing conversations. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to carry. And that's when the truth lands. What you feared losing was actually what had been holding you back. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Emotional chaos, when left unchecked, becomes a pattern we call normal. But once you step away, once you give yourself space, you see what it really was, a cycle, not a connection. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging to what hurts. It's not about building walls. It's about building boundaries. The kind that protect your energy, your clarity, your growth. And yes, at first it might feel like something precious is ending. But what's actually ending is the version of you that believed you had to stay in pain to stay connected. What comes next is strength. When you stop needing people who confuse your nervous system, you start trusting yourself again. Your inner world gets quieter, your mind steadier, your heart lighter. Sometimes what feels like loss is just clarity taking up space where chaos used to live. Let it. Something shifts when you stop giving your energy to what depletes you. A quiet power returns, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. It shows up in how you walk, how you speak, how you hold space for yourself without asking permission. This is the rebirth of the self. Not the self you built to survive, not the one you perform to be accepted, but the one that's been waiting beneath it all. Intact, honest, unbothered by the noise. You don't find this self by adding more. You find it by subtracting, pulling your energy back from what drains, withdrawing your attention from false roles, letting dead things die. Rebirth starts when you stop settling. Not just in relationships or career, but in how you speak to yourself. In how you tolerate disrespect. In how you excuse the things that hurt because you've gotten used to the sting. You begin to see how much of your life was shaped by fear in disguise. Fear of being too much, not enough, misunderstood, left behind. And once you stop feeding that fear, something else begins to grow, a self that doesn't chase, perform, or explain. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation. The unfolding of your truest form, not based on who the world told you to be, but on who you are when the noise falls away. This reborn self doesn't need validation to act. It doesn't shrink in rooms that can't hold its truth. It knows that solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. And that boundaries aren't barriers, they're birth canals for a new identity. And yes, there will be grief. Grief for who you had to be, for the roles you played, for the years you spent making yourself smaller to keep the peace. But once the release is complete, what rises is something sacred, a version of you rooted in wholeness, not approval. You start creating instead of coping. You start attracting instead of begging. You start becoming instead of explaining. And the people who resonate with this frequency, they find you, because you've stopped hiding the signal. The truth is, rebirth doesn't always feel like a breakthrough. Sometimes it feels like stillness, like shedding, like finally saying, I don't want this anymore, and trusting that something better will fill the space, and it will. Because when you stop giving your energy to the wrong places, you don't just reclaim your power. You redirect it into healing, clarity, into a life that actually fits. This is the self you were always meant to meet. Not a better version, just the real one. And now that you've stopped settling, you're finally ready to live as them. If this spoke to something deep in you, if you're done shrinking, done explaining, done settling, then let this be the beginning of your return. I send out a free weekly newsletter with more content like this. Grounded, honest, and designed to bring you back to yourself. You can subscribe below. And if you're on this journey with me, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Drop the words, "New Me," in the comments if you're done settling, if you're ready to move, speak, and choose from your wholeness, not your history. And when you're ready to go deeper, watch the full playlist. Tell about your experience with two demanding people and how your life changed when you chose yourself for others to learn from. And as always, protect your energy. Honor your truth, and above all, move like you're already free. Till the next time.